In this movie shooting section, I'm going to try to cover all the topics you need to know about shooting movies on this particular camera. We're going to go through a few of the controls. We're going to get the format set properly. I'm going to talk about some tips for exposure and focus, and a few other controls that you want to know about for getting the most out of the camera for shooting movies. All right, let's talk about the controls. So in order to put this camera into the movie mode, we've talked about this before, you hit the mode button and then you hit the info button, and that switches back and forth between the camera setting modes and the movie shooting modes. Now you can just hit the movie record button when you're in the stills mode, and it does kick you into a kind of an automated, simplified video mode. And so it's pretty easy to switch back and forth. It's two buttons, the mode button and the info button. But you know what? That's too much work for some people. And so there is a shortcut around this, and that is by reprogramming the multifunction button to immediately switch from stills to movie shooting. And I want to show you how this works. So let's go ahead and take a look on the camera and see what's going on. So normally, let me go ahead and just put up a regular screen of information here. So we're shooting still photos now. Normally we would press the mode button down, hit the info button, and then we have our various options when it comes to shooting movies. And now we can start recording movies. If we want to switch back, we hit mode, we hit info. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the quick menu. Actually, we need to do it from this screen here, and we want to customize the buttons. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for the multifunction button on the camera side of the issue. There are things that you can reprogram for video as well. And right here, this is currently set in the dial function. And that's what is normally up there. I would generally leave it there, but if you do shoot movies a lot and you want to be able to go there instantly, you want to come down and let's look for a camera, video camera symbol right there. Okay, so what this does is it switches immediately from our still mode right here. You can see the size of the frame. In the multifunction mode, it immediately kicks us over into a movie mode. And so we can start recording at that time. And while I haven't tried this, let's do a little experimentation. Let's say I like to leave the camera in aperture value for shooting movies. This is just to see. And so now if I switch back to stills, and let's say I like to have this in time value, and I hit the multifunction button, it automatically goes to where I last had it in the movie mode. And so this is a very quick way of getting back and forth. And so good item to know about. And so I am actually going to go in and reprogram that, because that could mess us up in the rest of the class. So I'm going to quickly jump down here to the multifunction, and then I'm going to go back up to the top of the list, and that's where our standard feature is for that particular setting. So for those of you who do want to go back and forth, you hybrid shooters that want to go back and forth very quick, that is your one button change from one to the other. All right, so when you dive into the movie mode, you're going to have a bunch of styles of shooting as far as exposure modes, shooting shutter speeds and apertures in various ways. And so I'm not going to go through these again because I already did it in the exposure section, and I'm betting a lot of you movie buffs already know about these particular settings in here. So scene intelligent is where the camera kind of figures things out for you. I don't know why the program camera doesn't have a little P on it. It should have the letter P on it. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it is the program mode. Now there is one thing that is kind of an interesting little quirk in here that you want to know about. And that is custom number 3 is kind of important. That is the default movie shooting settings when you are in the photo mode of the camera. And so we can customize our camera to do one-touch recording in exactly the way that we want it to. And so let me show you on this camera. I'm going to kind of jump forward on some things I'm about to fully explain here in a moment. So we are in the still mode now. I'm going to go to the video mode here. So I'm going to go to movie mode here. I'm going to dive into the menu, and I'm going to make some adjustments here. So let's say I like to shoot as my kind of standard 4K video, and then when it comes to frames per second, I like to shoot it at 24 frames a second. Okay, let's just say that that's kind of my style of what I like to shoot with on a regular basis. So the camera is set up in that regard right now. Let's go ahead and change it to a manual mode. We're going to change, let's see, our shutter speeds to, let's see, a 60th of a second. We'll leave the apertures at 5.6, and we're going to set 800 ISO. I'm just trying to set something up that's kind of interesting. Now, I'm going to go into the menu, and I'm going to dial on over to the wrench. I forget what number, but I'm going to look for it here. Custom shooting mode here. So we're going to register these settings that I just set up into custom shooting mode 3. Now 3 is a little bit special. We're going to set it there. Okay. So now it's locked in. So if I exit the movie mode now, and I am now in still images right now. Let's go back to a regular screen right here. Now, when I press down on the movie record button, it's going to instantly start recording in 4K, 24 frames a second with those exact settings that I just had. I don't know if they're right for this lighting, but if I just press the record button, we are now recording in that mode. It's the custom 3 mode that we set. And it looks like it forced me down to 1/50th of a second, then the 60th of a second. But everything else is as it should be, and so I can stop recording. And so if you want to set up something as a favorite recording mode that you can just pop into real quickly, you can set that up as custom 3, and that's what you go to when you press the recording button from the photo mode. So looking at the controls on the camera, obviously the displays are going to be a little bit different when you go from photo shooting, which is a 1:1.5 aspect ratio, to when you are shooting movies. Generally 16:9, but it is also 17:9 is one of the options that we will see. It is a active touch screen, so you can use that for focusing. You'll also see a record button. It's a circle to start recording and a square to stop recording. The Q button on the camera can also be used to access the quick menu, which is your main controls when you are shooting video. We're not going to go through all these different topics right here. They're covered in the menu and other places throughout the class, but it's going to be a good way to get to your main controls when you are shooting in the movie mode. Obviously, one of the most important things is getting the file format set correctly. When you dive into the menu to set this up for shooting with movies, there's 3 different aspects that you're going to be looking about. There's the resolution and aspect of the particular frame that you're shooting. There's the frame rate and the compression. And so for some of you cinema buffs, this is old hat for you, but for some of those who are new to shooting movies, let's go through the basics of this here. So full HD used to be the standard for everything that was awesome, and then we had 4K, and now we have 8K. I do have to warn you, if you are just casually shooting movies, be very careful about shooting 8K movies. It's going to use up a lot of data. I know on the memory card that I have here, when I shoot in 8K, I only get a few minutes of video. It's not the largest card in the world, but it shoots through massive amounts of data, and it is a real chore, you might say, when it comes to the workflow of shooting. So don't just shoot 8K because you think, well, it's the highest setting, that's what I'm going to do. It depends on what you're doing. Just make sure that it's working for you with the equipment that you have. At this point in time, 8K is still kind of new to a lot of us, and having it gives us a lot of capabilities, but there's some kind of responsibilities that come along with it. So as you can see with the 8K and the 4K options, there's some slightly different variations. And so if you want that slightly wider cinematic look, there is the D version or the standard 16:9, which is the U option as far as the aspect ratio. When it comes to frame rates, it shoots in all the common desirable frame rates, the 30 frames per second and 25 frames per second for NTSC and PAL. It does double that in most settings on the camera. And so you can double it again up to 4 times without sound for some high-speed recording if you want. You can also shoot at 24 and 23.98 frames a second for getting a more cinematic style look to your images. And so a lot of different options. Just be advised though, if you want to shoot standard video, that's either going to be 25 or 30 frames per second, depending on what region of the world you live in. So the compression is a very important topic when it comes to the file size. So the raw compressed, and all I compression options is where it essentially takes each frame of the image and has that as an individual frame that it's putting into the video. In order to save space, there is this IPB version where it uses non-moving information and kind of clones that to the next frame so that it's only really recording information that is changing from one scene to the next. And this can save a lot of space and can be very helpful in a lot of videos where you just want to reduce the file size, because video file size can get very large very quickly. I wanted to do my own test on file size, so I recorded 10-second video clips at 29.97 frames per second. You can see our full HD file sizes, and as we start shooting 4K, especially when we start shooting these uncompressed options, it starts getting quite a bit larger. Now when you start shooting 8K, it can get out of control very quickly in the size of the data. Once again, all of these are for 10-second videos at 30 frames a second. If you decide to shoot at twice as many frames per second, you can double it. If you want to shoot for 20 seconds, you can double it. And so it can go through data very, very quickly. So get your settings in here set properly. For most people today, high quality would be 4K. There's still a lot that you can do on FHD. If you're shooting videos that people are going to be looking at on small devices, phones and tablets and so forth, you don't really need more than FHD, full HD for that, unless you plan to crop in or use it in other ways. And so be careful about just ratcheting up all of these settings, because you will be going through lots of data. Now, there are many, many limitations when it comes to recording with an SD memory card. And this camera it uses two different types of memory cards, which we're going to talk about in the camera connection section. But this camera, if you're going to shoot movies, you really want to have one of the new cards, the CF Express cards in here. It's just going to allow you more options. You can shoot a lot of basic video onto a standard SD card, but I think if you've spent this much money on the camera, you probably want to get a card that allows you to freely shoot with as many options as possible, and so having that higher end card. Now, as is well known by most people, there are many limitations when this camera is being used in the higher frame rates, in the higher resolutions, in the low compression options. So anytime it's recording a lot of data, it's very difficult for a camera that is designed for still photography to accommodate the heat that is built up off that sensor. And so, yeah, it can record 8K. It cannot do 8K for an hour. It can barely do it for 20 minutes. And so the 8K is more of a party trick that this camera can do. It's not what it's designed to do. If you are planning to film your next Hollywood movie as this is your A camera and you're going to shoot it in 8K, good luck. It's not really designed for it. Technically, it can do it. It's just not great for it. Now, for those of you who do want to set up your cameras, let's go ahead and set up the movie recording options on this right now. Let's make sure we're in the movie recording mode. We'll hit the info, and then we're going to hit the menu button. We're going to dial over to our first tab and our first page in the first tab, our recording quality settings. And so we have a few different options in here. The recording size is the important one. Now you'll notice that as you move the back dial, you go up and down, and as you do with the main dial, that goes up and down, and the main dial on the camera goes left and right. So if you want to record 8K, we have the 17:9 aspect ratio and the 16:9 with the U, the same with the 4K, and then full HD. One of the things you will notice is that some things are grayed out and some things are available. If you select 8K, you cannot shoot at 60 frames a second. It is not an option. It's not a combo that you can use. And in the case of full HD, when you come down to this, you cannot select RAW as an option. If you come back up to 8K, you can select that RAW as an option. So I'm not going to go through all the combinations here. So obviously you got to make some compromises on what you are choosing. And so we'll set ours to 4KU. That seems like a kind of good natural one to have set. Don't need 60 frames. We'll set it at 30 frames a second. And as far as the compression option, well, we'll do an IPB just to keep file size down a little bit. And so you can actually see up here in the total recording time, if you recorded this in the compressed option, you'll get 2 hours and 11 minutes. With all I, you'll get 16 minutes and 42 seconds. As I mentioned, if you record in 8K, come down here to RAW, I get 2 minutes and 52 seconds with this card. So relatively small card when it comes to shooting 8K. So got that set, and we'll set that right there. And I got my camera set up the way I'm happy for shooting for right now. So hopefully you got your camera set up as well. Some technical stats for those who like the technical talk about movie shooting. Here are some of your stats on what the camera is doing and what it has available to it. It's going to be shooting in an MP4 file. That's pretty common. You're going to be able to work with that in a lot of different programs. If you do shoot in the RAW, you're going to get the Canon Cinema RAW, which is a CRM file, which is going to give you greater dynamic range. A lot of options. The whole movie thing is a kind of another topic for another class. We're not going to get totally into that, but it is a great way to get more dynamic range and the greatest color grading out of a particular image. One of the options we saw in there was a high frame rate option, and this is where you can shoot at 119.9 frames a second, and it puts it into a 30 frame per second movie. And this can be very fun for slowing down motion so that you can see it. Oftentimes good for a little dramatic shot in some cases. Now there is also an option for movie cropping. When you are in the 17:9 space, it's going to be a little different than the 16:9. First off, the time lapse is using the full width of the sensor, and so that's a nice big area. The 8KD and the 4KD, that 17:9 is using a very wide area. It's the full width of the sensor. When you do switch to 16:9, there's an ever so slight crop. I don't even think it's a 1.1 times crop, but it's just a little bit of the edges are cropped off, and it allows you to switch back and forth between 17:9 and 16:9 and just get a little extra wider or a little not as wide on the sides. We do also have the option going into shoot number 1 movie mode and doing movie cropping. And if you want, you can do a 1.6 times crop. So if you need a little bit more telephoto of a lens, if it just works better for you as far as framing in the viewfinder, you can do that. And that's something that can be very helpful in some situations. When shooting in movies, you want to make sure that you have the correct exposure. So one of the best ways of judging exposure is with the zebra settings. And this is where the camera will show you in a zebra pattern where the highlights are blown out. And so this can be adjusted in the zebra settings menu setting. And this is a little bit different than I have seen on other and previous cameras, so be aware of these differences. First off, on and off, turn it on if you need it, leave it off. Otherwise, it can be distracting in the viewfinder if you're not wanting it. There is Zebras 1 and Zebras 2. Zebra 2 is really designed for the topmost brightest area, and this is the way most cameras are set up. This has Zebra 1, which is kind of interesting because you can set it as a lower standard, and it's looking for kind of a middle area. So if you wanted to have the zebras turn on at a level of 80 plus or minus 5%, then you could have one turn on there, and you could have another one turn on at 95 or 100%. So you could have zebras turn on at 2 different points, depending on what your needs are with the exposure. And so I encourage you, if you are working with movies, you're concerned about your highlights, play around with these different settings to see how you can use one or both of them at the same time in order to do it. All right, one of the ways of getting a very exact exposure is by adjusting the aperture increments from 1/3 stop to 1/8 stop. Normally in the photography world, we change in third stops, and I'm not totally sure why, but it seems logical that the reason is why, because the difference between 1/3 of a stop is just notable enough in a still photograph that you can tell, yeah, it's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit darker. In the movie world, it's more common that you're going to be using multiple cameras shooting under the same lighting, the same subject. And different lenses and different situations are such that you might want to be able to have a little bit more precise control of the brightness of an image because you're trying to get one camera to match another camera that might have a different lens on it that has different settings and so forth. And so if you want to be very precise about the aperture control, there's going to be a lot more clicking to go back and forth, but you're going to be able to get to an exact brightness level that'll be right for the video you're shooting. Now, if you want to get as much tonality out of your image as possible, you might want to look into shooting with one of the Canon log settings. And so for general mom and pop weekend, not super important video, you can leave this turned off and just shoot straight video out of the camera and have great results. But if you really want to have good, high quality files that you can work with in color grading later on, you can shoot with log footage. It ends up shooting in this very flat, uninteresting style of image, but when it's graded, you'll have a lot of contrast to it. And so the camera originally came shipped with something called C-Log, which is still in there now, has a base ISO of 400, gives you 11 stops of dynamic range. They have since added with their firmware updates, that's why you keep your firmware updated, to C-Log 3. It has a base ISO of 800 and now has 12 stops of dynamic range. And this is something that's used in a lot of the Canon cinema cameras. And so if you use that with the right workflow, you can get beautiful colored images off of the camera. All right, for focusing the camera has a Movie Servo AF feature that I believe is turned on much of the time. And this is a terrible mode. Let me take a look real quickly on my camera to see if this is turned on or not. We're going to dive into the autofocus. Yes, this is turned on. This is, generally speaking, a terrible mode. So I remember back in the 90s, we had a lot of video cameras. And you turn the camera on and you just point it and it starts focusing at things. And it tries to get this and that in focus and wherever it's focusing on. And you'd have to turn it off to manually control it or be more precise and thinking about where exactly you wanted that focus to be. And so that's what this is doing. And it's going to be kind of annoying for any sort of serious video if your camera is constantly changing. Now, if you're just trying to record video at a birthday party and you just want to get this and that and it's fine, you know, for basic video, then that's why it's there. But for anyone who's shooting a little bit more serious video, you probably are going to want to turn this off, be a little bit more deliberative about choosing where you want to focus. You can use the touch screen on the camera, you can use the shutter release for doing it, or you can go into manual control. And so once you turn this off, you would set a focusing point where you want it to focus, press down halfway on the shutter release or the AF on button for doing that. And so this will give you, as I say, more precise control over what it's focusing on and when it's choosing to focus. Now, if you do want to manually focus, you can zoom in, and that is, of course, a great way for checking for absolute, pure, perfect sharpness in an image. And I encourage you doing that if you are in a locked off situation where your subject's not moving around too much. You can use the touch screen, as I have shown earlier in this class, where you can select different subjects to focus on. So if you're on subject A and you want to move to subject B, you can just touch B and the camera will move focus to that point. Another tool for judging focus is the peaking settings. And so this is a way in which you can see the zone that is in focus, because it will highlight in this shimmering, glimmering of highlight that you can adjust in the menu system. So when you dive into the menu system, you'll be able to turn this on and off. Normally you'll leave it turned off because it's kind of irritating to see in the viewfinder all the time, unless you are particularly wanting to use it. There is a low and high setting, which is how intense the shimmering is. And then you can choose different colors according to your subject and background as to what's easiest. Now, this is not as good as magnification for judging perfect individual sharpness on a subject, but it is very good. It's the best way to see the entire frame and judge where the focus is put in that frame. The reason I say it's not as accurate as magnification is because what turns red or blue or yellow, whatever one you have set here, is anything that has strong contrast. So it's possible that something is slightly out of focus, but still has strong contrast, and then it would shimmer, and you would think, oh, if it's shimmering, then it must be in focus. So it's very close to the mark. So it's like horseshoes. It gets you really close. All right, as far as the displays on the camera, you can use the viewfinder, you can use the LCD on the back, but in the viewfinder, by hitting the info button, you can cycle through the different groups of information and you can customize what type of information you see in the viewfinder. So if you want to see the histogram, you can turn it on. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. Same thing can be said for the monitor on the back of the camera. We Once again, have those red circles and red squares to let you know whether you could start recording or stop recording. And all of this is customizable as well, so you can choose what screens you see and which ones you do not. All right, when you play back a movie, you'll hit the set button to get to your playback options, which you'll have your common controls. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can turn the main dial on the camera for doing volume control. And the one that's kind of interesting is you can do a frame grab from this camera. And I'm going to show you how to do that, as well as do another little thing called a compression. And so if you have a movie that has been saved at a large file size, you can do a small compression of it. So let's go ahead and give that a try here. So let's make sure our camera, I think we set it up in a movie mode before. Let's go ahead and do a little focus. And so what I'm going to do is just check what mode we're in as far as recording quality. And I am going to make a slight change here. I'm going to go up to 8KU, and then we'll come down, and we'll leave it at IPB and 29.97 frames per second. So we're going to shoot 8K for just a moment here, and I'm going to go ahead and start recording, and I'm going to do just the most cinematic pan ever from right to left, and cut. Okay, we're going to call that good. That's our big video for the day. And so here's our video. We can hit info to cycle around through some of the different options. I want to be able to see the video. I'm going to hit set to get the controls. I want to play it. You can hear me talking. I'm going to pause it there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to come to this edit. Well, actually I want to go to frame grab first. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump into this, and I want to save this as a still image, and I'm going to go back to view the original movie. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to come in here to edit, and I don't want to cut the beginning or the end. What I just want to do is I want to save a compressed version of this file. 8K is huge file size. Let's save a compressed version of this. Okay, so it's going to work for a moment. Lucky I didn't shoot a long video. All right, so let's go back and look in the playback features as to what did I just do. So we're in playback, pull up some information, our big 5-second video. This, I believe, is our original video. Let's see if we can pull up more information about this. So this was shot in 4K. Did I not get it changed actually from 8K? I might have not got it changed from 8K. Might have still been in 4K. So in any case, we're at an 85.5 megabyte image. This is our still JPEG image, which is 2.1 megabytes in size. And so we can actually zoom in and see that it's still reasonably sharp. We've got something to work with. And so let's pull up some more info there. And here is our compressed movie, which is down at full HD, down at 8.8 megabytes. And this was at 85. So it's reduced it by about down to 1/10 the size. And so you can see how you can do a compression right in the camera. So if you are shooting a very large file size and you for some reason need access to something that's a little bit easier to transfer, you can do that right in your camera. So hopefully you've learned a little bit more about this camera in the movie shooting section. Get it set up for the way you want to shoot. Remember that the multifunction can be a shortcut to diving into the mode. Make sure you get custom 3 in the movie set up really the way you want it so that you can hit the movie record button and have it do exactly what you want to do. So a lot of controls in there. Hope you have some fun with that.